first I would like to thank the organizers for this event. I learned a lot yesterday. Although I would like to apologize because when I prepared my slides, I realized that actually the workshop is about approximating high-dimensional functions, and my talk is about approximating stuff and high-dimensional stuff, but definitely not high-dimensional functions. So if I want to be more clear, actually, it would be more about approximating high-dimensional probability measures, okay? So the idea is that when you're doing Bayesian statistics, so assume that you want to estimate a parameter theta naught, okay, in dimension 1, but I will talk about high dimension later. So there is a ground truth here that you don't know, and usually you put a prior on that, something like, maybe it's a bit too good, this one, so I don't know, maybe something like that, okay, a prior. Okay, and then when the sample size grows, when you have observations, then you come up with a posterior distribution that can be a bit strange, but you expect it to concentrate around the ground truth, okay? The problem is that in high dimension, this one can be very, very hard to compute. So if you want to use, for example, many talks mentioned Monte Carlo method yesterday, in high dimension, it might be very hard to sample from this distribution. So there is a very popular idea in computational Bayesian statistics is to replace this distribution by an approximation. For example, here you can think of a Gaussian approximation, okay? So the thing is that for this black thing, there is a theory. How does it concentrate around the true parameter theta naught? And the objective of this talk is to derive a theory for the red one, for the approximation, okay? So this is based on a paper submitted a few months ago and written with my co-author, James Ridgway. So it was submitted actually such a long time ago that I think that we can expect a rejection for Christmas. We'll see. But anyway, so I will spend most of the talk actually introducing notations and explaining exactly the different kind of distances I'm going to use to measure the concentration around theta naught. Then I will give the main result, but it will be quite short actually once the notation will be introduced, and I will in the end provide a few applications if I have enough time. Okay, so just very classical notation in statistics. Okay, so you have a sample, x1 to xn, drawn from a probability distribution, p theta naught, and the density of p theta naught with respect to some probability measure, like the Lebesgue measure or a discrete measure, will be denoted by p theta, small p theta, okay? And as it's a Bayesian framework, you have a prior pi, which would be this distribution here, okay? So the likelihood, which measures the adequation of the parameter theta to the data, is as usual, okay? So the product of the densities, and it will be denoted by capital Ln, okay? And usually, this black thing here that people use in Bayesian inference is the posterior. It's a probability measure that is proportional to the likelihood and to the prior, okay? So I just choose, I don't want to use heavy notation, so I don't write explicitly d theta knowing given one to x1 to xn, okay? I just choose pi index n, but remember that it means the posterior, okay? And actually, this talk is not going to use exactly the posterior. It's going to use what is called a tempered posterior, and it's something that is becoming more and more popular in Bayesian statistics. So you just introduce here something else, a power, alpha, between 0 and 1, that you take the likelihood to, okay? So there are many reasons, actually, for this, and the reason why I study this might not be the best one, but one of the reasons why this is so popular is because, actually, as it makes the posterior a bit flatter, it's easier to sample from it. So if you use Monte Carlo methods, it's good. I think that I would say that the best reason to use this is actually a recent series of papers by Grunwald and many co-authors, and actually there are other papers mentioned in our preprint, but this is one of the most striking one, I think. Is that it's robust to misspecification in the sense that if actually x1 to xn are not drawn to a member of this family, okay, this can work sometime and converge to the best approximation in this family, but sometimes it can do absolutely terrible things. And usually, it does not happen if you choose alpha carefully, actually. But the reason why I'm going to talk about this one today is that actually it's also easier to analyze this from a theoretical point of view, and especially the variational approximation we were able to derive convergence results in the case of a fractional posterior, but not in the case of the true posterior. We can discuss that later, actually. But okay, so first I'm going to explain how, for example, these authors use well, what theory they proposed to assess the convergence of the tempered posterior, okay? And then I will show how to derive the same results for the approximation. Okay, so what they use, actually, in order to measure distance here, is not the most classical notion of distance in probability distribution. It's called the alpha-Rényi divergence, okay? So it's a probability distribution given by that. And if you're familiar with it, good. But if you're not familiar with it, actually, it has, well, connections with more classical distances, okay? So all the properties of these things actually are derived in this very nice paper. It's very nice because you see all the properties that you might expect. Is it convex? Is it distant, etc., etc., are derived in this paper by Van der Ven and Haremos. And the thing is that for statisticians, Kullback divergence and Hellinger divergence are more classical tools. And the point is that when alpha is between 1/2 and 1, this Rényi divergence is between the Hellinger distance and the Kullback divergence, okay? So actually, this is not a distance, but for example, when d alpha of P and Rn would tend to 0, it would still tell you that Rn converges to P because this here is a squared metric, okay? So it's still related to convergence. And when alpha tends to 1, this converges to the Kullback divergence, okay? And now this is the results on the true posterior, okay? So this result was proven by Bhattacharya, Pati, and Yang. And what they proved is, well, it looks a bit complicated, but you'll see that everything is quite simple to interpret in the end. The question is, does this probability distribution here, the black one, converges to theta naught? And what you do is that actually you look here at what you're interested in, I mean a neighborhood of theta naught, something very small, okay? And this neighborhood here is called B of R, okay? So it's a ball of radius R around theta naught, but the ball is measured with respect to this distance, okay? So it's not even the distance, sorry, but to this kind of criterion, okay? So it's the set of thetas that are close enough to theta naught in the sense of the Kullback divergence between P theta naught and P theta, okay? And there is another term actually, but it's related and just here for technical reason, and I will even remove it later, so don't consider this one right now, just consider this one, okay? So if you want, okay, your posterior here, when the sample size grows, to concentrate around theta naught, what you need is that actually the mass of the prior distribution, under the prior distribution of this ball is not too small, okay? And it's rather intuitive, of course, because it's clear that in this situation, if my prior is like this one, you cannot expect a concentration to theta naught, okay? So it's very intuitive. But still then, in the end, it also quantifies the rate. So here you have R, here you have R, and if you manage to find the smaller Rn such that this takes place, then you know that the posterior under so the P theta under the tempered posterior is going to concentrate around P theta naught at this rate, Rn. So you also have a quantification of the rate of convergence. Okay, and this is the good point, and this is where you hope to obviously, you have to work to compute this, and in the end, you hope to derive the optimal rate. Okay, so obviously, I mean, this looks obvious. Nobody would choose a prior like that in this case. But in high dimension, obviously, the mass is more spread out, so it can be difficult, actually, to lower bound a log of 1 over pi of the ball. Okay? So now, variational approximations. Why? Actually, now you have to compute this black thing, okay? And as I said before, there are methods, like, for example, Monte Carlo methods. They work well, and they are valuable tools for, especially for, well, estimating theta naught, but also for uncertainty quantification. But the point is that most of the results on the convergence of Monte Carlo methods are asymptotics. And if you try to derive non-asymptotic bounds, unless in very favorable situations, you always have things that are not so good, and you have to wait a very long time. And in high dimension, actually, you might not even observe the convergence of your Monte Carlo methods. So given the fact that now there are very, very efficient approximation algorithm, that usually approximation algorithm, like optimization algorithm are much faster than Monte Carlo methods, people propose to use the approximation, the red one, the variational base approximation. So the idea is just that you don't consider all possible probability measures. You consider a restricted set of probability distribution that I will denote by capital F, and you approximate your tempered posterior, pi and alpha, by a distribution in F. Okay, so you just, actually the approximation is taken in sense of the Kullback distribution. So you just minimize the Kullback distribution between rho and pi and alpha when rho is restricted to belong to F. Okay, so first question, we know, even though it's not maybe efficient in all situations, but we know how to approximate the black one by Monte Carlo methods. Do we know how to minimize this? Is this feasible? And the point is that if you rewrite explicitly what it is that I mean by this Kullback divergence, so up to a constant, you obtain this. So you have minus the log likelihood plus the Kullback divergence between rho and pi. And it appears that first, in many situations, things, for example, of exponential models here, you would have a relatively easy form here for that term, okay? So it means that sometimes you can even have an explicit form for that thing, and I will provide a situation where you have an explicit form for the approximation. But even if it's not the case, if this is simple enough, you can expect that you will have efficient optimization algorithm like gradient descent or things like that. Okay, so popular examples are first the one I drew here, so a Gaussian approximation. Okay, so you just replace the problem of computing a probability distribution by finding a mean and a covariance matrix. But another one that is very efficient, and I will show an example later, is what is called mean field approximation. So actually this term mean field comes from physics, and I don't know physics, so I'm not able to explain. But still, the idea is just to assume that different parameters are independent. Okay, so for example, there were many mentions of ridge function yesterday. So in ridge function, you would have something like that. So the parameter theta would be g and alpha, and the function of interest is j of alpha dot x. Okay. If you write the statistical model on this and try to infer alpha and g, they won't be independent. But actually, to enforce the posterior to be independent, here you have g, here you have alpha, and it makes it easier to deal with from a computational point of view. So actually, this one explicitly used, even though I won't talk about it in the rest of the talk, but this is a typical situation where you can use this mean field approximation. Okay, so now what I want to do is for this, I remind the notation, pi, tilde, and alpha, so it is the variational approximation of the posterior, and I want to derive exactly this result, but for the variational approximation. And this is the result. So you can see that the formula here is exactly the same, but it's just that the assumption is slightly different, okay? And what does it say, okay? It says that there must be a sequence of probability distribution in the approximation family such that the Kullback distribution of p theta naught and p theta, the Kullback divergence, of p theta naught and p theta integrated with respect to rho n is smaller than Rn, and the Kullback distribution between rho n and pi is smaller than nRn. What's the interpretation of this? It does not look so simple, but just think, for example, of the case where rho n would be actually pi restricted to be Rn, okay? Okay, in this case, this just says that, well, actually, as rho n gives all its mass to be Rn, then obviously this is always satisfied, okay? And then this, it turns out that if you compute this, you exactly end up with this here. It's exactly the same. So actually, our result in the case where you consider rho n to be this thing is exactly the same as the previous one. But the point is that it might very well be that in the approximation family that you choose, F, you don't have this thing. Okay? For example, in a Gaussian family, you don't have prior restricted to a ball. So actually, our result is a kind of generalization. If you don't have like localized pseudo-posteriors in your approximation set, then actually the genuine generalization of the condition stated in the previous theorem is this one. You have to find a sequence that satisfies that and that. And the idea is still the same, actually, in the sense that the rho n that you find must be concentrated enough around to theta naught, okay? And in some sense, not to be not to have a disjoint support from the prior, okay? So in some sense, it's a very natural assumption. It just says, if you want your approximation to be good enough, then you actually need that in your family of approximations, of possible approximations, there is something that is good enough. And you don't need more than that, okay? So actually, for those who are familiar with like statistics and bias and variance terms and overfitting, in this situation, there is, for example, no possible overfitting, okay? So if F is huge, like if F is the set of all possible probability distributions, then, well, obviously, in this case, the Kullback distance is 0. Rho here is this guy. And this theorem just becomes the previous one, okay? So you still have convergence, but the point is that obviously in this case, the approximation is not really interesting because it does not lead to a feasible algorithm. So the balance here is not between bias and variance. It is between, well, still satisfying this condition to ensure consistency, but trying to propose an approximation that leads to a good algorithm, okay? So I will propose now two variants of these results. And the first one is just a weaker but simpler result, okay? So the point is that this has an easy interpretation, but for me, this term is less easy to interpret. It's here for technical reasons, because we have this can be rewritten as an expectation, and we have to control the corresponding variance. But actually, if you only want here, instead of having a result that holds with large probability, okay, if you're ready to have a result only in expectation, you can remove this variance condition, okay? So if you just want to control the expected distance of the posterior, okay, pseudo-posterior approximation of the posterior, sorry, to theta naught, with the same rate, Rn, then you just have to actually take the Kullback distance here and here. You don't have to introduce this squared log divergence, okay? So it does not bring something new, but it's just probably simpler to state, okay? The next result, well, there's something, actually maybe I should come back to the first slide. I already mentioned misspecification, and usually most of my work actually are in situations where you have a statistical model like this one, p theta, you have a sample, and you don't want to assume that you know the ground truth. You don't want to assume actually that the xn, x1 to xn are generated from a probability distribution in this model. What you want to, so usually I just want to assume that, I just want to prove that what I do, the estimator I propose, converges to the best approximation in this. And actually in this talk, it's not the case. I really have to assume until now that p theta naught belongs to the model. I wanted to state a result in the misspecified case, but you will see that here it is actually. It's, in my opinion, a bit like the new Star Wars movies. So it exists, but it's definitely not as good as it should be. So the reason why is that now I assume what I said just for this slide. X1, Xn is drawn from Q, but Q does not belong to the statistical model. And my target is theta star, that is the best approximation in the model. And under similar assumptions, what I have is, well, the same rate of convergence here, okay? But I have in addition, okay, this Kullback between Q and p theta star, which means that it's like the oracle inequality that we had in Richard's talk. The point is that in your inequality, you had a constant one. Here, I don't have a constant one, but it's even worse than that. Is that the measure here that I have is not the same as the one here. It's not on the same scale, actually. So, well, this result exists, okay. If the Kullback between Q and p theta star is very small, it still says something interesting. But from a theoretical point of view, my next objective actually would be to derive something with like Kullback, or Renyi, something that can be compared. So there's still room for improvement in this situation, okay? So, yeah, now I will talk about 2 applications, but as the theoretical part is almost done, do you have any questions so far, or is everything okay? Okay, so I have 2 applications. Only the second one actually corresponds to a real-life application, but the first one, I wanted to derive, to write the theory in, how can I say, completely from the beginning to the end in the case of Gaussian approximation, so this case here, okay? So it appears that in many situations, you don't even have to specify the likelihood completely. There are many probability distributions where actually this will give a very good approximation, okay? So this is not a very high-dimensional situation. Just assume that theta is the set R to the P with P not too large, actually. And we use a family of approximations. So we use Gaussian approximations. The mean can be anything in RD, and the variance matrix can be restricted to a set G, but it belongs to, obviously, to the set of non-negative symmetric matrices, okay? So we assume a regularity on the likelihood with respect to theta, okay? So it's a kind of Lipschitz condition, for example, when P is equal to 1/2. So we assume that it is smooth. So this will be satisfied, for example, for a logistic regression, okay? Okay, the Lipschitz constant can depend of x, and we have these notations for the expectation of m of x. We have to assume that it is finite, okay? And in this situation, if we do the computations, it's rather easy. You just have to compute Gaussian integrals. It's rather easy. And in the end, it turns out that even when you take, sorry, maybe I should insist on this notation, Fg here, the family of approximation, is parameterized by the family of covariance matrices that you allow, okay? Even if you take only a constant times the identity matrix, in the end, you obtain a rate that is in roughly in d over n, okay? So you have a concentration to the true parameter theta naught with a rate d over n. Okay, so it seems satisfying. The point is that if you want to implement this in practice, something happens, okay? You can rewrite here the criterion that we had to optimize. You remember, maybe, sorry, I should come back to this slide here, this one. And it appears here that you just have to integrate this with respect to a Gaussian distribution. And here it's the same, actually. The Kullback is an integral with respect to rho, so it's a Gaussian integral. And in order to approximate Gaussian integrals, well, as they can be written as expectation of function with respect to the random variable psi that would be Gaussian, then it means that actually you can use a stochastic gradient algorithm, okay? And you can use a stochastic gradient algorithm. So it means that at each step, you compute the gradient of the function that you wanted to optimize, okay? And then instead of using the expected form of the function, you just take the gradient with respect to one realization of psi that you can easily generate with your computer, okay? So in the end, this is the only thing that you have to compute. And if, in addition to the Lipschitz assumption that I made before here, you assume that, sorry, that I made here, you assume that p theta is, for example, convex and Lipschitz, then this is enough to ensure the consistency. But then, okay, there's a lot of assumptions, but in the end, you can use your stochastic gradient algorithm. So nothing new here, it's just a reminder of the stochastic gradient algorithm. But in the end, we end up with these results. And I was, even though there are, once again, there are many assumptions, I was really happy with these results. Mostly because what you have is a concentration result for an approximation of a Bayesian posterior, but it's really a result on what comes out of the computer after k steps. It's not a result on an estimator that you have to compute using an algorithm that might take a very long time to converge, okay? After k steps of stochastic gradient, you know that in expectation, your approximation of the posterior, pi NA k, okay? So this is really the one that comes out of the computer after k steps. It concentrates around theta naught at the rate Rn plus something in 1 over k, okay? 1 over square root of k. So it's not, obviously it's not very good, and if you're familiar with optimization, you know that under additional assumption like strong convexity, you can have faster rates, but still, these results, in my opinion, is interesting because it's the first time that you would find something like that, okay? So just pure non-asymptotic Bayesian result, okay? So now I have plenty of time to talk about my main example. So it's the matrix completion example. So I don't know if you are familiar with the matrix completion problem. This problem becomes very, very popular in statistics and machine learning about 10 years ago because of many applications, and including the famous Netflix challenge. So they had, they proposed a data set, okay, where you had like users and movies. So the users can be, I don't know, maybe you're in the Netflix data set, I don't know, our organizer, so Hemant and Hareta, and maybe I'm in their data set, maybe, and other people, and here you have movies, okay? So movies can be, obviously, I don't know, I cannot remember actually the name of the Turing movie. Imitation Game, yes. Imitation Game, and Star Wars 7 and Star Wars 8. Sorry about that, but I was really disappointed. So actually, you have to give marks between 1 and 5. And so what happens actually is that they have a database like that, Netflix. And each time you watch a movie, they ask you, well, can you give a mark for this movie? So 5 means really good, and 1 means really poor. So for example, I would say like 4 for 1. And I don't know, I mean like random things. I don't know, really, but just like that. And their goal was actually to be able to reconstruct the missing entries so that they can, if they guessed that, for example, this would be a 5, they would propose you to watch this movie. So they want to make sensible recommendations, so they want to propose you the movie, only the ones that that you're likely to enjoy, okay? So here is a kind of toy example version of this problem. I say toy examples because I have many assumptions that are not so realistic, but actually I can remove most of them. So I will talk about that later. I assume that there is a matrix, M naught, so this is the ground truth, the one that I don't know, okay? And the dimensions are here, M and P, so M is the number of users, P is the number of movies, and obviously you cannot assume that it's 100, okay? It's maybe millions, okay? It's huge. So it means that the matrix is absolutely huge, and what I assume is that actually the observations are first, I draw in the indices, so individuals and movies uniformly, okay? So in the uniform distribution. And then I observe yi, that is the entry of the matrix plus a perturbation that is, for example, a Gaussian distribution, where obviously the expectation is 0 and the noise is sigma squared, and I assume to know sigma squared. Okay, so what can be removed and what should be removed, obviously, is the uniform distribution here, because it's clear that some movies, for example, are more popular than others and are watched more often. And obviously, the Gaussian approximation is not so good because here you only observe integers. Okay, actually, it's possible to remove this and this too, but it changes the analysis and makes it more complicated, so I really want to stick to the toy example, okay? So in this case, actually, the Gaussian, it appears that thanks to the Gaussian distribution, the distance between the probability distribution on Y induced by 2 different matrices, M and N, actually is just the Frobenius distance renormalized by the dimension M and P. Okay, so it's a very, very simple thing to interpret, okay? So the point is that, obviously, well, in a general situation, if you just have an array of numbers, you cannot reconstruct it unless you have a kind of structure assumption. And in this case, one of the structures that was used by many machine learners when they wanted to test algorithm on the Netflix challenge, actually, was to assume that M naught is low rank, okay? I think it's clear why actually low rank is a good assumption in this situation. The point is that low rank means that actually you can design a few users, I would say a basis of users or a dictionary of users, but that is quite small, and assume that most users in the data set can be recovered as a linear approximation of either a linear combination of the basis users. Okay, so it's quite natural, I would say. The problem is that first now, if I want to do some Bayesian statistics, I have to design a prior on matrices and a prior that would make probably low-rank matrices more likely to appear than the other matrices, actually, full-rank matrices. Okay, so I read at the Bayesian literature, and it appears that priors on low-rank matrices, it goes back to the 60s, actually, because there were econometric models where people used these things a lot. So the first case is where you assume that you know the rank, K. So you assume that actually there are 3 possible different users, and we are all linear combinations of these virtual users, okay? So in this case, you can factorize the matrix, M, that is P times N. It can be rewritten as a P times K multiplied by K times M matrix, okay? And it appears that for computational reason, people decided to use Gaussian distribution on the columns not n, sorry, of u, okay? So u dot L is Gaussian, and v dot L is Gaussian as well, okay? The reason why is that in this model then, if you look at the likelihood, it will be something like e to the minus something minus the product u v transpose, okay, and squared. And once given, when u is given, then v, this is Gaussian in v, and when v is given, this is Gaussian in u. So it allows to use actually the Gibbs sampler. So the reason why they choose a Gaussian distribution was not for theoretical reason. It was because it leads to a feasible algorithm in practice. Okay. So rather than this formula, I like this one as well because it tells you that n is written as the sum of k terms. Each one is a row multiplied, a column multiplied by a row. So it's a rank 1 matrix. So you have a sum of k rank 1 matrices, and obviously this thing has a rank that is controlled by k. And this, I think, gives a good idea to extend this to the case where you don't know k, actually. You want to infer k. So what happens if you want to infer k? Well, the first time I saw this thing in this very special model was a paper by Salakutdinov and me, and what they proposed to do was say, no, okay, don't take k small. We don't want to assume that we know k. So we take k as the biggest possible value, the minimum between m and p, okay? But what we do is that instead of taking a constant variances for the rows and columns of u, what we do is that we take a variance gamma L that is itself random. So what it makes here is that you have k terms here, but if you choose the distribution on gamma such that most of the gamma L will be 0, most of the terms here in this sum will be close to 0. And so you will have a matrix M that is, well, it won't be actually low rank, but it will be very close to a low rank matrix, okay? And for technical reason, here again, actually for computational reason, people used the inverse gamma distribution for the parameter gamma L. But the point is that if you choose B very, very small, then the expectation and the variance of this thing are very close to 0. And so actually you can expect that most of the gamma L will be very, very close to 0. And as the inverse gamma is actually an Heavy-tail distribution, then a few parameters will be very large, okay? So it means that actually here you will have a few significant terms and most of the terms will be close to 0. Okay, so what can we do from a theoretical point of view to analyze this model? There was a paper by Taiji Suzuki who proved actually the convergence rate for this estimator, and actually the convergence rate corresponds to the minimax lower bound. But the point is that actually he was not really able to use this. He had to truncate the support of M. Okay, that's not a big problem maybe in practice, but that was really surprising because in practice this seems to work quite well, at least when it can be computed on small data sets. It seems to work quite well. And actually, with a PhD student of mine, Tetienne Mai, we also wrote a paper on this model. And we had exactly, I didn't know actually the paper, it was 2 parallel work, and then we discussed about that later. We had exactly the same problem. We had to truncate large values of U and V. And then in this case, we were able to derive the minimax rate of convergence in this model. And actually, there was a good point is that we could remove all the assumptions, like uniform sampling and so on. But we had to truncate the support. which was a kind of mystery. So in this case, the rate is given by that, okay? So the mean error of an entry, on an entry of the matrix M, okay? So M minus M naught, you take the sum of all the entries and you normalize by the number of entries, M times P. It's actually upper bounded by the rank of the matrix, of the underlying matrix, times the maximum between the dimension M and P over N, plus additional logarithmic terms, and it's not clear yet whether they should be here or not, actually. But there is a corresponding lower bound where the log is not, and we don't know if actually it's a problem in the proof in the upper bound or in the lower bound, okay? So is this good? Yes, of course. I mean, the minimax rate here is quite good because what you would expect if you did not have a low rank assumption, where you have to reconstruct n times p numbers, so you would have a rate in n times p over n, okay? But here, instead of this, which actually can be written like the minimum between m and p times the maximum between m and p over n. But here, instead of this, what you have is the maximum between m and p and just times the rank over n. So if the rank is much, much smaller than the minimum, then there is a huge improvement, and you can expect, obviously here, you would have to have at least as many observations that the number of entries in the matrix, but here you can have a much, much smaller number, okay? So for example, if this is 1,000 and 1,000, then you have 1 million entries in the matrix, but just with, I don't know, 10,000 entries, if the rank is smaller than 10, then you can expect to have a reasonable reconstruction, okay? So this is for the true posterior, and actually even worse than that, for the true posterior, truncated in a way that is maybe not so simple to deal with in practice. So question, is it possible to improve things with variational approximation? And the answer is, in practice, yes. Okay, so that was proposed immediately in the beginning, actually, because as far as I remember, this conference proceeding is one of the first, maybe the first conference where this Netflix challenge was proposed, actually. And Lim and EYT proposed an approximation where actually you just assume, to make life simple, that all the rows of U, all the rows of V, and all the variances gamma k are independent under the posterior. So that's a lot, okay, of constraints. But it turns out that there are two things. First, you can compute, exactly for this reason here, you can compute the form, the explicit form of the distribution of U, V, and gamma. Okay, so not that this is a non-parametric approximation. You just impose the independence, but you don't assume that this is Gaussian. You don't assume that this is anything, but still, it appears that the optimal in this case is almost explicit. The rows of U must be Gaussian with a given mean and variance. The rows of V must be Gaussian, and the gamma k's are still, sorry, there is a typo, are still inverse gamma. Okay. The only things that you have to compute now are these mean and variances, okay? Well, there is no miracle here, okay? The problem is really hard from a computational point of view. So they proposed the fixed point algorithm, actually. It's written here. So I'm sure that you cannot read it from the last one, but actually you don't want to read it. You just have to know that it's explicit and it's possible to implement it. Actually, I tested this algorithm. It's rather fast. It converges to some fixed point, but obviously as the problem is non-convex and it's a really challenging computational problem, actually, you don't have any guarantee that you converge here to the ground truth. So I don't have a non-asymptotic results as I had in the case of a Gaussian approximation before. But still, it seems to work well in practice. And actually, we decided to use our result on this case, and it appears that it works well in the sense that if you assume that your matrix, the ground truth M is low rank, and that it can be factorized as a product UV where the entries of U and V are bounded, then using exactly this approximation by Lim and T, and not a transformed version, not a truncated version, then we obtain this rate of convergence, here constant times Rn, and Rn is exactly the rank of M times the maximum between M and P over N, so I mean the minimax rate of convergence. Here again, maybe up to log terms, okay? So as I said before, actually, the parameters in the inverse gamma distribution, you remember the one that generated the variance, have to be, actually A has to be taken as a constant, and B has to be taken as something very, very small. So actually, it does not really have to be exactly that number, but it has to be really, really small if you want to be able to derive such a bound, actually. Okay, so just one thing in order to close the loop. This is about the variational approximation. But obviously, as the set of variational approximation is included in the set of all probability distribution, as a corollary, you immediately have that the pi at n alpha, so I mean the true posterior, also converges at the same rate, okay? So it means that, in some sense, even though we have stronger assumptions, but it allows to remove this limitation here, like the truncation of the support of n and of u and v that appeared in the previous papers for technical reasons, okay? So you recover the rate of convergence for the true posterior and for the variational approximation that is used in practice. Okay, so maybe I was a bit fast, but this is it. Thank you.